The tertiary care units has all the specialization, including the preventive care and the prevention and curation, both are included. The whole system is, in theory, it's based on the referral system. For example, a person will come to the BHU and he has got the sufficient treatment, it's okay. If he needs further medication or treatment, the BHU person and then the doctor will refer him or her to the RHC. If he got the proper medication there, it's okay. If not, then the concerned person there, he will refer him or her to the THQ. Again, if he meet all the things and if he is satisfied, then it's okay. Otherwise, he has been shifted to THQ, DHQ or AHQ, Agency Headquarter Hospital. If not, then he or she will be referred for the tertiary care unit. So this is the health system, and this is basically the British model. The place where the study has been taken, it's the capital of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is the northwest province of the Pakistan. Previously, it was known as the Northwest Frontier Province, and it's located in the northwest of the country, along with the Afghan border. We have our boundaries with Afghanistan. In the northeast, we have our boundaries with the Gilgit-Baltistan, and with the east, we have the Kashmir and federally tribal administrative areas, and Punjab and Islamabad as well. The provincial capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is Peshawar. It has an area of 74,521 kilometers square. According to the 2017 census, the population of this province is 20 million, from 25% are males and 48% are female. The population of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa constitutes 13.4% of the population of Pakistan as per the 2017 census. Objective of this, we have two broad objectives for this research studies. The first one is to find out the causes of mental illness among women in general and married women in particular. And the second one is the impact of such illnesses on his personal, social, and family life. Methodology. The universe for this study was the two teaching hospitals that is located in Peshawar. The first one is Khyber Teaching Hospital, and the other one is Lady Hospital. The sample size, it was a small scale research, so to keep the limitation of the study in the mind, the sample size was just up to 50. Sampling technique was used. It's a multi-stage cluster sampling has been used. It was a quantitative survey, and the first phase we have divided the areas into two stages. The first one was the Lady Hospital, and the second one was Khyber Teaching Hospital. In the second stage, we have selected 25 patients from each hospital, that is 25 from the Lady Hospital and 25 from the Khyber Teaching Hospitals through lottery method. Because most of the time, the patients has been discharged on the regular basis. So to keep in view the administrative setup and the current situation of the hospital, we have divided, opted for the lottery method system. For the tool of data collection, a semi-structured interview schedule containing both open-ended and closed-ended questions were used for the data collection. The most important thing in this study that was because culturally this province is very rigid, and most of the time the females are not allowed to give answer to men. But keeping in view the ethical consent, informed consent was taken from the respondent before conducting the interviews. Study findings. The first one was the demographic information. 45.5% of the respondents were of the age group from 20 to 30, which is very alarming situation because this is the age group which is at that time they are hardly not matured in it. 34.4% of the respondents were age group from 30 to 40. 68.1% of the respondents were illiterate. Because in this province, the female literacy ratio is less than almost 23%. 90% of the respondents were unemployment because they were the housewives and therefore mostly 90% they were unemployed. 50% of the respondents had lived in a joint family system. In this province, particularly, they have a joint family system. 84% of the respondents' husband and father were employed. So the breadwinner were their husband, their father. 42% were among that 84% that were the daily wager, whose daily income was less than $4 a day. 52% were not satisfied with their total monthly income. It's a very alarming situation because if a person is getting less than $4 a day and he has to support a family of 10 to 15 people, so in this case, it's very important. It's very difficult to satisfy their needs. Home environment. 84% of the respondents said that their home environment is fine, while 24% of the respondents said that they were worse relationship with their parents and in-laws. Prevalence of mental disorder. 30% of the respondents said that they are suffering from this problem from the last 2 to 6 years, while 24% of the respondents said that they are suffering from this problem recently. Recently means from the last 1.5 months or 2 months. Treatment facility. 66% of the respondent has taken medical treatment, while 30% of the respondent went to science center for spiritual healing. So, if you look at this, there is a point that still a large number of people believes on the spiritual healing as well. Level of satisfaction, 70% of the respondents were satisfied from the present treatment and the faculty, while 30% of the respondents were not satisfied with the present treatment because of not getting mental disorder and other family members. 52% of the respondents said that they have mental disorder in other family members from where she belongs. And among them said that 3% said that they have their brother have the mental health issue. 8% said that their father, 10% said that their mother, 4% husband, 4% sister, and 4% of the respondents replied that they have this issue with their uncles. 76% of the respondents were satisfied from the attitude of the family members. Though 96% had arranged marriages because in this country or in this province, most of the marriages are arranged basis. 36% were satisfied from their marital life. 78% were of the view that their husband and father understand their problems and feelings. It's basically it's up to their husband and father, not in the case of their in-laws. Behavior of in-laws during their illness. 76% were dissatisfied from the behavior of their in-laws.
Next is I am not sure where Dr. Altalib went. We'll wait like 5 seconds for him to pop back up. Sorry, we missed what you said, Hamada. You went.
I keep on getting. Okay. Let's go ahead. Move on to Merve to the role of religious factors. PhD student from University of Massachusetts.
Yeah. Okay. I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Can everybody see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. So my topic is the role of religious factors in social integration for Syrian refugees in Turkey. And I'm currently in Turkey, but I study at UMass Lowell. And because of the pandemic, I came back to Turkey. So I'm going to be presenting from here. And my paper was a literature review. So I will combine both the literature and also the things that I saw in the field when I visited the refugee camps in Turkey. So there's going to be a combination of the two. So firstly, I would like to show you this picture. So I actually wanted to ask the audience, but when I prepared this presentation for Chicago, but apparently we're not going to be able to interact. So when I saw this picture the first time, it was on a newspaper, and it was about entrepreneurship, and it talked about how successful entrepreneurship this is, and this is giving opportunity for Syrian refugees in the Netherlands, and they're just using these life jackets and then making some bags and laptop cases and stuff like that out of them. And it was found to be a very brilliant idea that will help people to earn money. Like when you first look at it, it looks amazing. Like people are earning money and they're just being like independent and stuff like that. And you can see how happy the two guys behind the woman. But then when you look at it from a psychologist's perspective, it actually looks very different, because these people have very traumatic experiences, especially those who are in the European Union countries, had to use these life jackets, like most of them. So that might be a very traumatic experience for them to be working with them again. So there are different ideas about using them. Some psychologists think that it's okay because they're building something new out of it, but some others have really traumatic experiences. And when I read the news in detail, I saw that people actually talk about their traumatic experiences while working on it. So the company's employees said, so these are like direct quotes from their interviews. So they said they also remember their own journeys, the Dark Sea and the steep Greek mountains. So this person said, this person said, like, I remember my own journey. So the other person said, we were terrified it would sink. It was dark, our children were crying. So like people always remember these kind of things, and this is a possibility to re-traumatize them by giving them this kind of a job. So like when you have this mental health perspective, it's a whole different story. So that's why we as mental health professionals should be involved in each step about like such vulnerable populations. And after this, I also gave some like background information about Syrian refugees in Turkey, because not many people know about it. And so Turkey is the largest refugee host country in the world. So there are more than 3.4 million Syrian refugees, and there are also some like refugee groups as well. So it's the largest refugee host country. But 97% of these refugees are not in camp settings. So when they first came to the country, they used to live in the camps, like most of them, but then they were spread all over the country. So they're now in the communities, and like they're just working and making renting their own places and earning their own money and stuff like that. And they have access to free healthcare and free education if they're registered officially. But these people had some previous traumas before coming to Turkey, and also the other countries that they went to, such as death, physical, emotional, sexual traumatic experiences, or threat of death. And some of them even experienced torture, and maybe some of them were injured, or like they experienced disappearance of family members, or just experiencing difficulties of living in a conflict area should be more than enough. But they also had problems with like the journey while they were crossing the border, because it's not really easy to cross a border when there's a war. But then after they came to their new countries, it's not just about Turkey, their new destinations, they had socioeconomic disadvantages, poverty, changes in family structure and functioning, because most of them are spread to different countries. Like Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan are the biggest, have the biggest population, but some of them also went to European countries or the US, Canada. So when I talk to refugees, they always mention some other family members who are in different countries. So that's why there are a lot of changes in family structure and functioning, as well as social support, because when they lose their family members, both because of the death in the war, or moving to other places, or it means most of the time the losing social support. And they have difficulty to access education. So as I said, Turkey gives them free access to education if they're registered officially. But still there are some language barriers, and that might be a difficult position for a refugee to be in. And also most of them are living in very crowded places, because there are problems with finding rental apartments, and because of the racism. And also renting an apartment is actually a financial burden, so not many people have the luxury to be able to do that. And also they might be experiencing hostility and racism, and for kids it might be bullying in the school, and some other experiences like that. And there are also some problems caused by cultural differences. Like when we talk about all these stressors, I try to find some ways to connect the two cultures, because Syria and Turkey are very close, like they're neighbors. So that's why there are some cultural things that we share in common, and also some Islamic things that make us like more familiar to each other. So when I talk about it in the US, like in my school, for instance, I told people that like in Turkey we have adhan that is going on 5 times a day on the streets. You can hear it from everywhere, and it's in Arabic, and Turkish people don't speak Arabic. So one of my friends were like, so you listen to something that is happening in refugees language? And he was very surprised, and I like saw how important it is to be like how important this religious connection is, because it really makes them feel like welcomed. And I heard from a lot of refugees that say, I can't go to a European country because I hear adhan here 5 times a day. So that's also a very important factor for many of them. So all this, we talk about all these stressors, but when we talk about stress, we don't only talk about the psychological impact of it. So there are also some physical health outcomes because of stress. So I'm sure most of you guys have experienced them as well. So when you're stressed out, you might have digestion problems, shortness of breath, difficulty concentrating, and maybe some sleep problems, or like muscle problems and pain, psychosomatic pain. So stress has both psychological and physical consequences, and these people also experience all these big stress factors, and as a result they might end up having physical health problems at the same time. So that's why to overcome these problems, we need to find a way to increase social support, because as I mentioned in the beginning, social support is reduced after migration, and it might be a big stress factor. But we can use geographic proximity and also these religious factors as a common ground that will make them feel like they're more welcomed, and also they will feel like a part of the society. So migrants sense the loss of important social ties because they, this is also for both for immigrants and also refugees, because they're changing location and they're going to different places from their family members, and it is actually an ecological transition. So they have to rebuild their social support system. And but when they are not able to rebuild their social support system, it might result in social isolation, which is a cause of stress and which might have both psychological and physical symptoms. And there are a lot of studies about that in the literature. So for instance, it's an old study, but I would like to mention this one because it's conducted with Vietnamese immigrant women in the United States. So when they investigated how they are coping with immigration, they found out that high level of emotional support given by the family, the fluidity of relationships within the group itself, and also the role of church as an institution which serves as a link with their original culture. So as I mentioned, maybe we can use a role of mosque or some other religious concepts because both countries are predominantly Muslim. It might be a factor that might help them cope with stress. I want to get into details about social support because there's a huge literature about that, which talks about how important it is for both psychological well-being and physical well-being. So there are a lot of studies about how many group memberships has an impact on health and well-being, and it might have an impact on better mental and physical health. It might result in longer life expectancy. And there was another study conducted 8 years ago, which found out that socially isolated individuals are twice as likely to suffer from medical complications such as second stroke, heart attack, or death compared to those individuals who had meaningful social relationship. So social support, as you can see, is a very important factor, and some studies even call it a social cure because it might actually be a cure for many people. And I want to emphasize the word meaningful here because not all social support is good for our well-being, because some people might not like being in the crowd or might not feel comfortable in certain places, or some social support might have negative consequences because it's coming from a low quality social group, such as maybe like addicted group or some kind of gang or something like that. It's not the kind of social support that we're looking for. So why is this happening? Why social support is really important, and why should we use religious concepts and use this Islamic identity as a social support tool? Because groups inform and support the self. So people actually, it's allowing us to understand ourselves not just as individuals, but as a part of larger collective. So instead of I, we feel like we. So that's why it's an important concept. And also the identities, relationships, and group memberships help us develop a sense of belonging, purpose, and meaning. And there are also some cultural factors that I wanted to emphasize because there's an experiment conducted by Ajar Turk in 7 years ago. And in this experiment, they wanted to treat PTSD patients in the camp settings in Turkey. But many people didn't want to go to the clinic because they didn't want to be labeled as Majnun, which means insane in Arabic. So the researchers needed to build the clinic in the kindergarten so that people bring their kids and then pretend like they're bringing their kids, and instead that they were also getting treatment there. So there's also a perceived stigma in Muslim communities, and actually this is all over the world, but seems like it's more common. It might be more common among Muslim communities. So this is something also we need to emphasize while working with refugee populations. And there is also anti-refugee sentiment and religion that I wanted to mention because, as I mentioned, people are losing their valued identities because of this fleeing from a war, and they might face assimilation or perceived discrimination can happen. So that's why we might use some religious concepts to help overcome the feeling of losing valued identity or feeling of assimilation. So, and according to studies, like these kind of tools actually might help people coping with acculturative stress. So some of the things that I wanted to list here was, for instance, the Ansar and Muhajirun discourse, which is like Muhajirun means actually refugee, and even the Prophet Muhammad was a refugee himself. So we have this concept for a very long time in the Islamic culture, and it's always celebrated how refugees were welcomed in the society, and also how they were helped. And there are a lot of ayats and a lot of stories that we hear about it in the Islamic history. So that's why this might be a concept that we might need to emphasize to help people be more welcoming towards refugees in the country. And also, according to another study, I found out that using terms such as qadar and iman was actually very common among refugees when they were asked about how they deal with this kind of stressors, because qadar and iman means destiny and faith, and these are the actually concepts that people rely on when they needed it the most. So by talking about these kind of things, maybe we can utilize them more, and people might feel more comfortable talking about their feelings and how they're coping with it. And also, when I reviewed the studies, I saw that many refugees, actually many Syrian refugees, talked about how they use religious coping, and like when they were asked how they're actually feeling more comfortable, feeling more relaxed, and then what they do when they are feeling sad or depressed, they usually talked about how they were reading Quran and how they were praying and stuff like that. So it might be a useful tool, as mentioned frequently in the qualitative studies. And another factor that I wanted to mention here was suicide, because according to a study, I didn't cite it here, but they conducted a study with Syrian refugee women, and they found out that some women actually talked about how suicide was prohibited in Islam, so that's the only thing that is preventing them from committing a suicide. So that actually gives us an understanding of how important it is to use this kind of concepts. So in the previous slides, I mentioned the word meaningful. So there's this table that I wanted to, the figure that I wanted to show here, because as I said, not all the identities, shared identities are actually meaningful to people. So we have 3 steps in order to understand what we need to do with population. So firstly, we need to understand if there are any opportunities to maintain existing group, and are there any barriers to social identity maintenance to be overcome. So if this is the case, we might maintain link with the existing group and then continue with them. But if there is not a possibility, we can ask for more opportunities to join new existing groups. But sometimes it's not also possible, because there might be some other barriers to social identification. So, but if it's the case, we might facilitate link with new existing groups. But if it's not possible to, we can look for new opportunities to create new groups. And if that is the case, we might facilitate development of a new group, and we might continue, we might help people get their social support from these new groups. But it's important to know that simply adding more shared identities is not going to be beneficial for all people. So thank you so much for listening to me. And so this is my contact information if you have any questions. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. Excellent. Okay, so we'll circle back. I have some questions for you, but we'll circle back. Okay, next, so now, alhamdulillah, we have the bio sketches of each person. So next is Professor Hidna Iqbal from University of Punjab, who will be discussing personality, hardiness, spiritual intelligence, stress-related growth, and individual disability. Okay.
So,
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And I'm Hidna from Pakistan. I'm a lecturer at Center for Clinical Psychology, University of the Punjab, Lahore. And I hope everyone is doing fine in these times of crisis. So I'll start with my presentation. It's personality hardiness, spiritual intelligence, and stress-related growth in individuals with physical disability. So just to have a little stats about physical disability. According to WHO, there are almost 500 million people in the world who are disabled in some way. And 80% of these individuals live in developing countries like Asia, Africa, South and Central America, and Middle East. A survey done in Pakistan by Poverty Alliance Alleviation Fund in 2012 showed that 8 out of every 100 Pakistanis are with some degree of disability, and 1 out of 130 persons has severe disability, and some of them even have multiple disabilities at one point in time. So it's a very pertinent population to study, and very under studied as well. So we wanted to see different positive factors that were happening in these people, and how they are coping, and what are the factors that are actually making them resilient and better in their functioning also. So just to define these variables first, personality hardiness is actually a constellation of personality characteristics that function as a resistant source in encounter with stressful life events. It's actually a factor from a positive psychology, and it's obviously it is like a existential courage. It gives people some existential courage, particularly the courage and motivation to face stressors accurately. And stresses can be anything, like life stressors or personal stressors or any professional stressors. So it is an individual's disposition or style that develops early in life and is reasonably stable over time. It's like any other personality characteristic that is present in individuals, and it has a predisposition, but it obviously sharpens and develops over a period of time when the people they encounter different scenarios in their life. About spiritual intelligence, next slide please. It is a set of mental capacities which contribute to the awareness, integration and adaptive application of the non-material and transcendent aspects of one's existence, leading to such outcomes as deep existential reflection, enhancement of meaning, recognition of a transcendent self, and mastery of spiritual states. So it's like any sort of intelligence, like we've studied emotional intelligence and intellectual, the EQ, the IQ. Similarly, it's that sort of thing which spiritually we have some intelligence quotient in ourselves, and it helps us to have a connection with our creator, and it helps to move on. It helps us to move on in the times of crisis. Finally, stress-related growth, it is a person's struggle. It is a result of a person's struggle with stressors that lead towards positive psychological changes. Now, interestingly, I'm sure you guys would have heard about trauma, like post-traumatic growth. But this variable is different from trauma. We chose stress-related growth and not trauma-related growth because trauma is like an event. It happens, and after that, the person actually, bounces back. But stress-related growth is something which is related to a stressor. Stressor is like a continuous thing. It happens. It keeps on going. And when we talk about physical disability, and we chose those people who had this since their birth, they had a congenital disability. So this stressor was there for the rest of their life, maybe, and they had to live with it. So we didn't choose trauma, and we chose this variable instead of trauma-related growth. The aim was obviously to, examine these positive psychology variables in a population which was, in Pakistan especially, they are discriminated, they are stigmatized, they are underprivileged, and very few rehabilitation centers are, there to so that these people can maybe rehabilitate themselves and enroll themselves in certain centers so that they may learn any skill to cope with themselves. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, very few rehabilitation centers are there, and we wanted to study these variables in these populations, that how and what are the aspects that actually care them, they actually have this opportunity to bounce back with this stressor. So our rationale was to just to seek certain these variables in them, and then to not just to study them, but also to tell people, especially medical professionals and mental health professionals, and maybe physiotherapists and psychotherapists, to actually incorporate such variables in their intervention plans, so that these people can take advantage from their strategies and intervention plans. Our sample comprised of 105 participants. The mean age was 27.36 years, and they were selected from all. These participants were all enrolled in rehabilitation centers. That were, some of them were government, and some public sector, and some was private, and some was semi-private, semi-public sector rehabilitation centers, and the numbers you can see on the slide. So they were selected from those rehabilitation centers. There was a certain selection criteria. Only those people were included who had lower or upper extremity disability. And those disabilities were congenital or hereditary type. And the age range was from 18 years to 50 years. And we excluded all those people who had any visual or auditory or speech related disability. Only physical disability of lower and upper extremities were included. And they didn't acquire it. They had this since the time of their birth. And any psychiatric comorbidity was also ruled out. This is a table that is showing the characteristics of the participants. You can see majority of them were males and very few females, because unfortunately, again, in Pakistan, females are a bit, they're like underprivileged in certain sense. Normal people are normal females are underprivileged, and we're talking about physically disabled. So people, they don't enroll their daughters or sisters or mothers in the rehabilitation centers. Education, most of them, they had done their masters, and majority were Muslims, and most of them were living in joint family systems. This is a description of the measuring tools we used: cognitive hardiness scale, spiritual intelligence, self-report inventory, and stress-related growth scale. All of them were translated with the permissions of the authors in Urdu language, and they had a good internal consistency, as you can see in the table and the slide also. So we actually translated them in Urdu language, and then we used it. This is the procedure of the study. First, we got approval from the Departmental Directorial Program Committee, because this was done under University of the Punjab. And then we took permission from all the authors to use their tools and to translate them. Then we took permission from all the head of the institutes from which we collected data. We approached the participants, but only those participants were included who fulfilled the selection criteria. And then data collection was done. Obviously, all ethical considerations were assured, because we told them the nature and purpose of study and all the rights of the participants. This is the response rate. A good response rate overall, 94% was good. Some of them were not willing to participate in the study, and some left the forms incomplete. So overall, it was good. This is the table of results. It's actually because we use the Urdu version, so we sort out the internal consistencies of our own tools among our sample size, and you can see in the alpha values are in good range. They are ranging from 0.62 to somewhere 0.87, and they were pretty good. So we are okay with the translations also. Next table is about the correlational metrics. Because stress-related growth was taken as an outcome variable. So you can see the last column, the spiritual intelligence. These are the subscales of spiritual intelligence. 4.1, critical existential thinking, personal meaning production, transcendental awareness, and conscious state expansion. All these were showing good correlations with the stress-related growth, and all were positive and significant. Similarly, personality hardiness, you can see it's also showing a highly significant correlation with the stress-related growth, which shows that greater the personality hardiness, greater will be spiritual intelligence, and as a result, greater will be the stress-related growth among these individuals. This table is showing the regression analysis of all these variables, as stress-related growth was a outcome variable, and you can see again the table is again showing a good R2 value, 0.925, and it's a highly significant and strong prediction of both personality hardiness and some of the subscales of spiritual intelligence, like critical existential thinking and personal meaning production and transcendental awareness was showing positive, high positive prediction of the stress-related growth. This is the emerged model. Again, it's only the pictorial presentation of the table we just discussed. And you can see again, this was the model that emerged from the analysis we did. So our findings are obviously consistent with the prior literature, which showed that, you can see on the slides that Joseph and Butler, they found out the similar findings, and these results also indicate that individuals with high personality hardiness, like those having a sense of control and feeling of involvement and commitment and purpose in daily activities, they were showing greater spiritual intelligence also, and as a result, stress-related growth also. And personality hardiness was actually acting as a bumper, like it was a cushion that showed that it was there to help them, not developing any mental illnesses, maybe like anxiety and depression and trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and negative emotion and cognitions related to their disability. Again, similar results, and they are actually facilitating our findings. And one possible explanation for the protective factor of spiritual intelligence on stress-related growth is the association of spirituality with meaningfulness in a person's life. Like even if you're disabled and you have a meaning in your life, that you want to do something and you have a purpose and you have an aim to pursue, obviously you will grow out of your disability eventually. So it was found that personality hardiness and spiritual intelligence, they predict stress-related growth, and all these findings and the emerged model was also consistent with the prior literature, as you can see in the slide again. Angel 2016 and Nishi et al. Had the same results. So finally, spiritual intelligence is about search for meaning of existence, finding meaning in every incident of life, and critically analyzing abstract concepts like existence of some spiritual power and creator, and individual's relation to his creator and other individuals and the universe, and the subscales of spiritual intelligence, like personal meaning production, which shows creating meaning and purpose in all physical and mental activities, like ability to recognize higher dimension of self and others, and critically analyzing the nature of reality. And it all predicts our stress, not just in, I believe, not just in physically disabled people, but also us are like so-called normal people also, so-called physically abled people also. So the belief on the existence of a superior power helped them to better cope and experience stress-related growth. As in one ayala says to us all, that those who patiently persevere will truly receive a reward without measure. So if we believe in this ayah, definitely we'll grow out of our stresses, but no matter what sort of they are. Limitations, definitely every original work has a limitation. I believe the sample was small, and the male and female presentation was not very well established, because we had our we were time bound actually, and we had our practical problems also. We had some constraints. There were the stringent criteria also, and not all physically disabled people are registered in rehabilitation centers in Pakistan. So few female participants were there, and we could not run any analysis on the gender differences. And I believe that would be interesting to see what sort of gender differences were there if we could run analysis such like that. Similarly, we didn't include people who had accidental or acquired disability. We just included congenital disability. So again, the comparisons can be interesting to see. So this was all, and I have my email address at the start of this presentation, and if you have any comments or questions or anything, you can please contact me, and I'm here for the Q&A session also. And thank you so much for inviting me for this talk.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm gonna keep my comments short because we fell a little bit delayed. But as Discussant, I want to kind of give a little bit of an overview thinking about global mental health, and also give some feedback to the lecturers. And thanks so much for sharing your work. So global mental health is an important topic that's dear to my heart. It's the idea that there's this what we call the 90-10 gap, in which 90% of research comes from 10% of the world, mostly from North America and Western Europe. And that gap is shifting. So in the last 2 decades, it's no longer 90-10, it's more like 30-70. But still, there's overrepresentation of and defining and framing mental health and treating mental health in the context of what's happening in the Western quote unquote West. Whereas there's so much innovation and important work, not to mention a perspective from the rest of the world. And so global health is kind of the framework in terms of thinking about that. Oftentimes, global health tends to focus on marginalized populations, and how do we deliver care to people who are in resource poor places, including the West, including the United States. So much of what we've learned, much of the innovations in global health interventions, for instance, in task shifting, instead of leaning on mental health professionals, training community leaders or community caregivers with specific tasks, much of that research came from India and the subcontinent. And some of that is being imported into Western countries. So that gives you a sense that it's global as opposed to international, that we're kind of a global village and we can learn from each other. And so those things are important to recognize. One of the challenges of global health in places where you are under-resourced, there's several challenges. One is often people who are mental health professionals in particular are clinicians, and they're overwhelmed with clinical duties. And so they don't have time to do research, and they often don't have the resources and institutional support to do research. So that's a common challenge we see in global health. The other challenge is access to literature, access to the discourse. Okay. So people's work, including in these 3 talks, give a good example of that. You want to engage the current literature, the current discourse about your respective topics. And so we'll talk about that shortly. And oftentimes that's been a challenge in terms of how do you frame your work to what's going on in international journals and international conferences. And so that's something that we want to support. So in terms of the first talk about Mohammed Ibrar, I'm not sure if he's here. I don't think he's here. So unfortunately, I'll make some comments, and if he's here, then please respond. If not, I'll just offer some comments. So he approached this issue of this identifying mental health issues really from a public health perspective. And he basically did an epidemiologic study. He framed it as public health. And so he shared like what is the mental health system in Pakistan specifically, and in Peshawar as well, and how does the referral system work. I would have liked, whenever you do global health, it's nice to get some more of the social cultural context. So we heard that a little bit from Merve in terms of Turkey and the Syrian issue, and we really saw some images and got a sense of some of the cultural issues and the shared cultures between Syrian refugees and the Turkish population. But I would have liked to hear more of that in terms of Peshawar and the cultural context. As an example, if you're going to publish your work in the international journals, anybody who reads Peshawar is going to think about Taliban. So whether Taliban is a factor or not in your work or in society, you have to acknowledge it. You can either say Taliban is overrepresented in the media and doesn't really affect what's happening on the ground, or you say Taliban, the culture of the Taliban culture affects us this way. And so those type of things, kind of giving you a cultural context, social context is important, especially in global health work. One comment that he made was that the mental health care system and the healthcare system in general is very much a referral system, which I thought was interesting, and I was actually quite surprised by that, because there's been a mandate from the WHO and from the global health world to shift everything towards primary care. So I was hoping for him to expand on that. And is mental health not only getting integrated in primary care, but is also mental health more available as a primary resource as opposed to a referral resource? So I was interested to hear his perspective on that. There's some methods issue that I wanted to bring up to him about the scales he used. He used a semi-structured interview to identify mental health conditions. And I was wondering, why didn't he use the CD or the mini or established scales that are pretty well established to identify cases, as opposed to just interviewing people? But those methodological issues, I'm giving feedback as a peer reviewer. If he wants to publish his work, those are the kind of issues that he's going to face, that people are going to ask him about. And so it would be important for him to address some of those issues. Moving on to the next talk from Merve, I really appreciated what I mentioned earlier, kind of giving the human experience. When you saw those images, that first image was very powerful, and the double-edged sword, or the tension of they're trying to show how resilient these Syrian refugees are, yet they're also kind of recreating the trauma for them by working on the life jackets, and she did that very nicely. I'm going to cut my feedback short, because I want to give time for people to talk. But much of the discussion was about social support, and one of the obvious issues is COVID. We're in social isolation, and how is that going to inform her work? I was very curious as what she was doing, planning for work. Many of us who are active in research, if we have collected data before COVID, we do have an opportunity to do a pre and post COVID research project. And so I was curious to see if what she's thinking about how to deal with COVID and social isolation. And I was also, in terms of a very specific methodological question is, are you thinking about using social network analysis? I mean, that's a very hot methodological tool that I think is underused, and it sounds like this is the type of work that would fit really well with that. Moving on to Hidna's talk. Again, I really appreciate you gave some context. You gave a really nice description of your methods. One thing in terms of the framing, you made a point to distinguish between stress as a paradigm versus trauma. And I'm not sure, that's not my expertise, so I'll concede that. I'm not sure in terms of the discourse, the research literature, where people are with that, because I don't think people are still thinking about trauma as one event followed by recovery or PTSD. Oftentimes, people are talking about complex trauma, where you have multiple sub-threshold events such as domestic violence or abuse, childhood abuse, that lead, and people frame it as psychological trauma as opposed to just stress. So that's one thing you should think about in terms of how you engage the literature and how you frame your work. I don't think it changes necessarily your outcomes, but just how you frame where you are, how you're speaking to the literature. The other, I think, important thing in terms of framing your literature is you talk about spiritual intelligence, and as opposed to other types of intelligence, including emotional intelligence. But it wasn't clear from your framing of your research why people with disability. Is there a particular why you could have done the same study on people with mental illness, or even people who are, quote unquote, healthy? And so I think it's important to frame why did you have a particular interest in this particular population sample. The other more specific methodological, or actually an analytical issue, which I would refer to my psychometrics colleagues, is that R squared for the hardiness was really extraordinarily high. I mean, it's over 0.8, and it kind of begs the question of, was it collinear? Is it actually a finding, or are you measuring the same thing that you're studying? And so that's something that you need to ask somebody who's more sophisticated than me in psychometrics and statistics, but that's something that is a red flag for me in terms of analyzing that data. So that's something that, before you submit, I'm not sure where you are with your publications, but before you submit, you want to address that to make sure that you account for that, because that popped out at me as a person that is a simple-minded social scientist. Okay, so let me open it up first to the speakers and then to the group. Okay, so Merve, why don't you offer your thoughts or response?
Actually, my paper was a literature review, so I didn't think about any what kind of analysis I need to make, because I just wanted to see what literature offers. And also I went to the border in Turkey and visited 5 different cities, and also went to Idlib in Syria to observe the situation there. And I talked to the NGO employees and also the doctors in the field. So the paper was a combination of the 2 experiences that I had. So I didn't collect any data, so that's why. But that was a good idea. Thank you so much for offering it, because I will need it in the future, because social support is an important topic for me. So probably I will do a lot more studies about that in the future.
No, so I understand that for this talk, you were giving a literature review, but my question is, you're currently a doctoral student
Yes.
in a program. What's your, give us a preview of what are you thinking in terms of your research? Are you thinking about doing mixed methods, about doing qualitative research? What are you thinking about doing for your research? You froze.
So for my dissertation, hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so for my dissertation, I actually collected qualitative data, and I didn't want to focus this paper, my dissertation, on Syrian people. Instead, I focused on Turkish people and how they perceive refugees, because I wanted to see if this is an actual stressor for refugees. So I asked Turkish citizens who were born and raised in Turkey about their memories with and interactions with Syrian refugees here. And I asked them 1 positive memory, 1 negative memory, and a turning point, and also another vivid memory. So that was 4 questions, open-ended questions, and also some demographics. So I'm right now, my arrays are coding the data, so it's going to be a qualitative study.
Excellent.
So for my dissertation, I'm in that phase now, but I didn't collect any quantitative data.
Okay, great. Look forward to it. Okay, Hidna. The floor is yours.
Yes, I'm here.
So I offered some thoughts about your methods and your results. You want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for your feedback. You asked about my not my conceptualization, actually, the literature's framework about the difference between stress and trauma. So yes, it's obviously it's a huge difference. Stress cannot be related or maybe compared to trauma, because trauma is something, it's not an event, but it happens as a one theme, one thematic, maybe origin. But when we talk about stress can be a combination of multiple things. Trauma is associated with one theme, one problem, or one event. But stress is something which is ongoing. It keeps on coming back. I'm not saying that both of them are comparable. I'm just saying that we chose stress related growth and not trauma related growth, because when we took this population, another question of yours about this population also, when we chose this population of physically disabled people and not any visual or auditory impairment, just the impairment or disability in their extremities, maybe lower or upper, both. So when we talk about this population, and especially those having congenital disability, they are born with this problem. They have this problem. They haven't experienced themselves as a person who can walk or who can use his hand or his arm to do stuff which a normal person can do, maybe at their homes or at their educational institutes. Or so they have this thing which is ongoing, which will maybe accompany them for the rest of their life, and maybe they will die with it, because again, unfortunately, in Pakistan, they are not very privileged as far as a disability is concerned. So we don't have any walkways, we don't have any seats for them in the buses. Like I've been to Europe and UK, and people, they actually facilitate them. But here in Pakistan, unfortunately, we don't have any pathways or instruments, or when we go to malls, they don't consider them that this population can visit them, and they have certain requirements when they go to public places, parks or buses or malls, and even in their schools also. Even in our university, there are many students who are physically disabled, but unfortunately there is no facility for them so that they can be functional in their classrooms or in their cafeterias. So this population particularly, yes, it is these people are there. They don't necessarily have any mental health problems, but because of their disability, they might develop some, because they are stigmatized, they are marginalized, and they are not given the due respect and the due facilities that they should be actually in our part of the world, and that's very unfortunate. About your concern for the values of regression analysis, yes, you're right. This might needs to be rechecked, and maybe because this study was done in 2-3 years back, and I might go through the data again to see any outliers or any problems in the data. I'll do that again. But thank you so much for your concern, and your you pointed it out, and I'm yes, for publication purposes, yes, I think I need to recheck. Thank you.
And yeah, so let's open up to the group, and Sushi, go ahead and call on people. But I'll urge you to check the complex trauma literature. Just do a review on complex trauma. I think you're going to be surprised what you see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sushi, you want to call on somebody?
Yep, Masume will go ahead and ask a question. Sorry, we can't hear you. You might have to make sure the audio is working. Mm. Still can't hear you.
Or you can just put it in the chat box.
Yeah, would you want to put it in the chat box, please?
Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we can't hear you.
Okay, next question.
I do not see any raised hands, but I did have a question. It was for Professor Iqbal.
Yes.
I know you and Hamada were going back and forth between the discussion of trauma, complex trauma versus a stressor. So there are two things which actually stood out to me, and I wondered what both of you thought about it. One, since you took people who had trauma or stress or whatever you call, they were born with it. It wasn't
Yes.
an event that happened in their life that began it. So even if it's complex trauma, it would be considered like this. In my mind, if any trauma, it has to be an intergenerational trauma that got transmitted, but nothing that happened in their lifetime. So I wondered if you thought that the response would be different on one versus the other. The second question I had was,
sorry. Okay.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, please continue.
The second question I had was, it would be very interesting to see how other stressors would contribute to the stress-related growth. I wonder if there was economic stresses. I wonder if you took somebody else who did not have a stressor of being differently abled but had similar scope of other stressors, if your findings would be same or different.
Thank you so much. Yes, we actually asked questions about their other stresses also, not just the stresses that were related to their disability, but also, yes, any, financial stresses and other personal relationship related stresses, educational stresses also, because again, as I said, I'm teaching in a university. We don't have such facilities for such kind of students, and we actually have seats for these students, that disability seats, people who are disabled, but they can apply on merit basis. But again, we don't have any facilities for them. So yes, we asked about these stresses in the demographic sheet, and I'm sorry I didn't share it in the presentation, because it's actually a part of thesis which I picked up for this presentation, and I didn't actually included each and every detail about. There were other analyses also, so maybe if you're interested, I can share the results with you over email or anything. I didn't add this in my presentation.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting to see. Thank you.
Sure.
And I believe Saira has a question. And Saira, you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just tried to. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Speak. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you so much, Hidna. Very good presentation. I am very interested in Pakistani population. I'm hoping I can at some point collaborate.
Sure.
The idea of disability, I am into this just from a learning point of view, curious to know when you mentioned that the cohort of participants that you had, women were less participatory. And could it be that, I'm wondering if it was survey-based research that you guys interviewed people at office or looked at them in their homes, or maybe perhaps from a researcher's point of view, because in America, a lot of research is done to accommodate people with disabilities by actually going and doing home visits. That might be a recommendation that I can have. The other one, and the other one is if there are primary care clinics where they come for their regular checkups, hopefully they can be engaged there, and PCP offices can be requested with dear doctor letters that would you please let us come in and we will do our bit of the research by not having to make the client or patient come back twice, or have to have them come over to our location, just in the interest of their disability and comforting them. The other idea that I have is that when you talk about institutional help in terms of helping students with disability accommodations in colleges and universities, I went to Army public schools there when I was home back in Pakistan, and I know that the stairs and the bathrooms, they're not created for
yes,
people who have
unfortunately.
So a lot of advocacy work related research can be done, and as professionals in mental health field, if advocacy is something that we can do, I would be curious to see advocacy related research coming up where you could engage focus groups between the researchers, as well as, like you mentioned, open-ended questions might be a good idea, versus just looking at the statistics of people, how they respond and what number of groups membership is there in terms of participants. That could have a readily available data that can then hopefully convince the government or interested parties to help create that environment in which accommodations for disabled people can be actually materialized, whether it is sidewalks or elevators or ramps in the buildings. And inshallah, it can all be done there.
Inshallah, hopefully, yes.
From a strictly mental health point of view, do you see in your awareness, do people with disability, like Dr. Hamada said, that cumulative stress or traumatic stress is a big, huge thing here in America too, where people are researching. That's why I wanted to mention positive psychology, grit, and vulnerability-related research by Brené Brown is all very popular these days, because when veterans are coming back, they have lots of trauma. Doctors these days with COVID have tertiary trauma and burnout. I'm sure it is happening in Pakistan too with the medical health professional. Very quickly, I would like to say that populations are ready to be collected data on, but it's just that it is our, as a collective research community in mental health, capacity to make use of that data. And so are there people who are either congenitally disabled versus acquired disability that they had in life, more into mental health? I know generally there is stigma for typical population as well, but stigma is everywhere. Stigma is here too. I've been running groups and there are many people, white, black, or Spanish, or Jewish, or Asians, or Pakistani Hindus. They will all come and they say, well, my family also says that I shouldn't be seeking help if I'm going to go through the revolving doors of groups. So I think we can kind of tone down the stigma talk, because we already know it. Stigma is there, privilege related access is there, that these are issues, but could we also focus on the people who are actually trying to reach us, and then how their quality of care that we offer them is any different, and if you see any particular resiliency factors in their personality, hardiness, as you coined the term or talk about it, that can further inform us that people with disabilities are a lot more resilient.
We're out of time, so I want to give Hidna a chance to respond. And we're out of the session is actually over in terms of time, 1 minute over. And so thanks so much for your input, and it's important. So let me give Hidna a chance to respond and go from there.
Thank you so much, everyone, for showing interest in my research. Actually, unfortunately, again, in Pakistan, there is no research culture. People who are doing research, they are not acknowledged. They are not encouraged even by professionals. I know many professionals, when our students go to collect data from hospital settings, they don't allow them. They say either you give us authorship, or then you'll be able to collect data. So there is a really a bad scenario over here as far as research is concerned. Plus, the second thing is security issues, because we cannot send our students to community projects. We discourage them to take up community data, because door-to-door surveys here are not possible. There are a lot of security issues over here in Pakistan. There is no registered, our government, again, unfortunately, there is no policy to register people who have mental health problems or who are physically disabled. Only people or families who consider it important to seek help, only they are there. Even if the patient himself wants to seek help, I know I'm here giving consultation to students and patients. they come to seek consultation. They don't tell their family they're going to take therapy because stigma is highly prevalent over here. Yes, we need to work a lot, and it's just a drop in an ocean. And thank you so much for your suggestions, and please reach me if there are other questions or comments. Please email me and I'll get back to you. Sorry for the time, Dr. Hamada, I'm sorry it's taking long, but thank you so much, everyone.
No, I apologize because these are very important conversations to have. We only have so much time, but we have to respect people's time. And so, this is the point. The point is to share information, share resources. Hopefully, collaborations come out of this. And so, I hope you guys stay connected, as well as connected with me, because I can certainly help coordinate things. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you for everybody participating. And assalamu alaikum.
I can see you in the next session.
Thank you.